All right, so today we're going to look at some auth stuff and a package that I'm calling narf. So what narf is hopefully going to do is make some of our JavaScript a little bit easier to write. Up till now, we've kind of been looking at each project as its own thing. We don't have any reusable stuff that we can carry forward from one project to another. And so that's going to hopefully change with this. So let me go ahead and bring up the narf site here. And actually, let's move that over there. And I'll pull this, see if I can make this actually fit. Okay. So, well, that's a disturbing thing. Gotta love it when, things like this go wrong. So let me just try to start from scratch because I have been refactoring a bunch of stuff. So this is, well, let me actually show, okay, so the auth system, there's some command line tools that go into it. There are some, and there's a lot of APIs that go into it. So the basic APIs are handled here in this Postman collection. So I did recently refactor a bunch of this. I haven't tested a lot of these Postman APIs. I've been doing a lot of automated testing. So they're not necessarily all going to be working right now. So what I'm going to do is try to do an initdb with everything dropped. Okay, so this is Arborian auth. Let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger. Okay, so all that I did here is I just did a docker compose exec API sh to get a shell in my API container. So dropping this command line tool right there, we just clear out the database. And now I want to add an app, auth, and then I want to give it a redirect URI. So that should have just created an application in the auth system. And it's got this client ID and this client secret. So the callback, this is for use when we want to actually authenticate with this app. So let me come over here and we'll see if this is all working. Let me look at my variables.
What do you mean when you refer to the auth system?
So this is a brand new API. So we're going to be using this to log people in either to TCPA or to Alfred Knows or whatever other website that we'll be using. So it's an API that allows us to do all of that in one place rather than having to kind of configure the way that, using lots of different authentication providers. Maybe I should step back a couple of steps. So having users log into website or to web applications, kind of the old school way of doing it is you just have them, you give every user a username and password, right? And then they give that username and password and they're logged in. The new way of doing things, I guess, is there will be different authentication providers. And these would be things like Google or point-click-care. And so we want to allow people to use their credentials on those authentication providers to log into our web application. And so in particular, TCPA wants to be able to use their Gmail logins to log into the web app. So that's one less password they have to remember. So that is certainly possible to do using OAuth, but it means that you've got to go into the application that's allowing that login and do some configuration, make sure that it's handling the kind of the OAuth three-legged authentication dance appropriately, and everybody's got their own little tweaks. Like if you do it for Google, you're going to have to do it again for Cognito, and you're going to have to do it again for point-click-care. They all have their own little nuances. And so what the auth service that I'm building is going to hopefully do is going to allow us to code for one of those, which is the auth service. And then on the auth service, what you'll do is you'll say, well, I need to log in. And then it'll do a query to our auth service and say, what can I log in as? And it'll allow you to basically select which one you're going to log in as. And it'll handle all of that. So it becomes the go-between. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So this is what I've got running now. So now there's Now I got a client ID and it's got a client secret right there. I'm going to copy this client secret and come up here to this collection, and I'm going to edit. Oh wait, that's not the right. Yeah, that is actually the right place. No, I should just make this a variable. Let me just make this a variable. Let's go ahead and do that. Oop. Okay. So first off, if you just request the root, like most of our stuff, it gives you a bunch of links. So these are going to be the basic entry points to the auth service. We can look at the apps that are available. That's just base REST app. I don't think you have any requirement to be authenticated there. So yeah, these, nothing too special there. And this is not secret or anything. This, your client ID should never be secret. So we go here and look at the providers for that app, and there's no providers set up. So right now you can't log in using this app. It's kind of dumb and doesn't do much. So I'm going to come over here and I will add a provider, and we're going to add Google. Oh, sorry, I need to give you AUTH is the app, is the client ID, and Google is the provider. And let me just do a -- help. Okay, yeah, we want to allow sign up here. Okay, so this is not quite to the point of being able to use it. So if I run this again, you see we do have this set up now. There is a plugin ID, an app ID, and more importantly, we have an authorize link right here. This is the link that people will click on that'll take them to Google eventually to do their sign in. And then there's also a token link. If you wanted to get a Google token for some reason, then you'll be able to do that on the authentication token. All right, so let me close this one. We don't actually want that one. So one of the things that we do have to do, though, is we have to configure this Google plugin. So it's a Flask auth config set. AUTH is the application. And one of the things that we're going to need to do is configure this particular plugin ID. So I've got to copy that. And then this becomes our plugin ID right here. Or not plugin, but provider ID. And I'll delete the old one. So the two things that you need if you're going to configure pretty much any OAuth application like Google, so you need a client secret and a client ID. I get these on Google from this client application that I set up in Google APIs. So right now this is just for our own play. And the thing that, I guess the important thing that we get off here, the client ID, the client secret, those are important. And then you also have to enter in these callback URIs. And if you're going to be using the auth service, like the real auth service is hosted at api.auth.arborianhealth.com callback. So you should put that in as a valid callback, but also put this one in if you're going to do local testing. Okay. So I'll configure that. And so that's configured now. And if I come back over here to Postman, actually, let's not go to Postman. I think it's now time to look at Narf. Okay. So that's basically all that we've done so far, right? We created an app and we created one provider for that app, and we said that provider allows you to sign up for the app. So if we all cross our fingers, the AUTH provider is showing up here with the login button. So let's see. Should sign up a user, and now that user exists. Doesn't have any scopes. That's like permissions. It took all of the information that Google knew about me and it pulled it in to this particular user account. All right, so that's kind of cool. I guess if I go back here, actually, I guess I can go. Is there a way to get back to my login page? I didn't put a way to get back to login. Well, there's one way. I could log in as a second user, and then that user, actually, I can also link users. So I don't think this is going to let me do this. Yeah, because that client has restricted. And I think this is just going to log me back in, or it's going to cause me to be logged out. So let me log back in as myself. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, that's the basic idea of auth. To take this to the NARF step now, to get out of my auth container, actually, let me make sure that I can log out here. Can I log out? Yes, I can log out. Fantastic. Just log back in for now. Okay, so I thought this made sense as a demo application for the new Arborian REST framework. So let's go into NARF here. So the way that NARF is set up is that there's the NARF, this is the library. So this is where you're going to find all of the basic code. You won't need to go into this most of the time. You'll probably be able to just npm install Arborian/NARF. The example is going to be the way that you'd actually use this. So here is kind of the top level of, actually I'm not even using this example component, so I don't need that. But this is like the top level application as to what you would be building if you're going to be using a NARF-based app. So we got the provider. This is something new. This is, we had kind of talked about Redux a little bit, but we didn't ever get into it very much. So Redux is, if we remember that the state and the store, or sorry, the state and the dispatch, when we said use reducer, Redux is like a formalized way of building things that use that sort of approach. So this provider right here comes from React Redux. What it does is it sets up a state object, and it also has a dispatch function that's associated with it. State plus dispatch makes a store object. And so the way that I'm actually configuring the store right here is just this configure store. And I say that the reducer is this reducer from Arborian NARF. Okay, so that's where that's coming from. And the configure store, this is from Redux.js toolkit. So that just simplifies a lot of things and gives you warnings if you're doing things the wrong way in Redux. Otherwise, you just kind of, it's a foot gun. The API provider we get from NARF, and that will be, yeah, that you just pull it directly out of NARF. You need to give it the root of your API. And so this is right now going to be pointing at the NARF root, or sorry, the auth root, and the client ID, which is just auth. And then we put the router, which we've looked at the router before. That's where we have all of our routes set up. The way that these variables get put in here is actually through a file called env.development. Oh, that's, yeah, in the NARF example. And so what I've done is you just have to set this to React app API root. This actually sets the environment variable API root, I think, or maybe it actually sets both of these, but in any case, this is what you need to do to set it up to run it locally. Okay, so what did I change? Oh, I got rid of the example component. Okay. So, oops. To actually use this stuff, if we look at the router now, let me see where we are. So the router's got a home page, which is just this empty page, more or less. It's got the login page, and it's got an authorized page, which is where it takes you eventually to show you information about your user. And it has this callback page. So the way that authentication works with an OAuth provider is we redirect the user over to that provider. They do whatever magic they have to do to log in at that provider. And then it redirects them back to us, and then it has to know where to send it back to us, and it's going to send them back to the callback page. So AUTH actually is a kind of the jump point in between us and Google, but that's the basic idea here. So the home page is not interesting. I think the login page is probably, oh, well, that's not interesting. Let's look at a provider table. Okay, so here we've got some actual, sorry, get this to, okay, maybe that'll work. Okay. So whenever there's a table, this is the material table is the component that we're using. Material table, you provide it, the main things that it's got to have is data and columns. And then you can also have options and other things like that. So let me actually go to the login page here. I'll just go manually. Okay. So the provider detail, that's just going to be a panel up there that allows you to log in if it's a login provider. And then the actions, the refresh right there, that's going to call the refresh. So let me actually let me back up, go back to the routes or the router. One of the things that the router does give you is the API route from NARF. And so that is automatically configured to make sure that the API is initialized before you start using it. Okay, so actually, you know what might be interesting? And I'm sorry, this is a little bit more disjointed than it has been in the past. Let me figure out how to put this at the bottom. Okay, there we go. So refresh this thing. So let's look at the network and actually see the things that happen. So the login, that's just actually logging, or that's just you know, getting the page itself. It pulls down some JavaScript. When it actually starts talking to the API, you'll see it's localhost 5005. So it grabs the home, or it grabs the root, and that's what we call the directory. That tells it what all the main links are. Once it's got the directory, then it's going to try to refresh authentication based on a refresh token. So a refresh token is like this long-lived API key that you can use to get a new access token. Access tokens are what you actually use to authenticate yourself, but they typically expire really quickly. So our access tokens are set up to expire every hour. The refresh token never expires in our case. So this is all happening for you by NARF. So it gets the refresh token, or it tries to refresh it. If it's able to refresh it as it was here, then it gets user info, and that's going to be, let's look at the response there. That's actually all this information that it had about the authentication of this particular user. And then it also gets a list of all of the authentication providers. So we only have the one right now, the Google one. And so that's showing up there. And I think this is, yeah, for this particular app, it's just fetching all the providers globally. Ultimately, you'll probably want to restrict that to just the providers for your app. And please feel free to stop me if something doesn't make sense. So that's the actual network requests. But in the background, as these things are happening, NARF is actually updating what we call the state. And so if you go to this Redux tab, if you've got the Redux dev tools installed, you can see the things that are happening. So it requests the directory, and then it sends this event, the NARF JSON API, or this action, I should say, and it gives you the data that it fetched from the web. And so this was the particular action type. And when it retrieves this, then it sticks it into the NARF JSON API directory in the state. So it saves that directory. Later on, when we need to use it, and NARF in particular needs to use it, it can select it back out of the state. Then it does a login. So here's the action for a login, and it's basically saying, I have logged in. So this is the access token that it provided us, and the time when it expires. So we actually calculate this because technically OAuth doesn't tell you when things expire. It tells you how long until they expire. So it'll say, well, it expires in an hour, but it doesn't tell you what time it will be in an hour. Right? It leaves that up to you to calculate. And so we calculate that. And then the change in state is for the auth, we change the access token from null to this authentication information. Then we request the user info. So that also is setting part of a little slice of the authentication state. And then we request the list of providers. And so that's going to go into narf JSON API objects provider, and it inserts that. So at the end of all of this, this is what our global state looks like. We've actually got a whole bunch of data that's been configured for us. So that's the directory. So if you ever need to look up, well, how do I create a link to another identity? Then you could do OAuth.link. How do I retrieve an access token? This is like logging in right there. There's the URL for the access token. And then there's also a REST API that you can use. The objects also, anything that you fetch will go into this little cache right here. And for authentication, this access token is always available to us. And that way the API will know to send that in any request that it makes. All right. And then, the user info, these are just things it knows about me. So if we actually go back and look at the network, some of this stuff is happening automatically. Like once it's got the token, the actual response that we get here is this access token. When it gets the user info, so that's the request itself, it's inserting that token into the authorization header. And that's something that the narf is doing for you. And it's doing that based on the value in the state. Okay, so trying to think. Well, so that's the way that narf has been set up to work, at least. And then hopefully, all that you need to do is, let's go to the authorized page. So this is the authorized page right here. Actually, that's kind of a dumb page because it just assumes that you've got the user info. But if you need the user info out of narf, you just say, I want to use a selector. That's something that you get from React Redux. Give it a function that will select the user info. Narf provides that under ducks. And then it's got an auth and a JSON API duck, and then select user info right there. And this is the whole thing to show. I should call this the authorized page. So, and to display this, this is all you need. So another thing we can look at actually is if we go and do a login here. So it got the providers, we know what it's doing with those. I'll go to the provider page. I'm going to watch and see what happens. So the first thing that it did is it went to this authorize. This was on the auth provider, and it's going to give us the redirect URI. Actually, you know what? Let me switch back and look at the provider table, because there is some work that's done in the example app here for this. So when you're logging in, the authorized link that we're building, actually, narf does help you with that. I didn't realize how much narf was helping. But you basically give it the authorized link for that provider, and that's something that we had gotten earlier, which is going to be like the provider and the provider ID and authorize. So it's basically this part of it is given to you. And then we want to tell it that our redirect URI is going to be back to the website, the front end. And our intent is to log in. This is an extension. Like, this is not something that OAuth normally tells you, but we want to also allow you to link accounts together so that you could log in as two different users. So that generates the authorized link, and then that's this long thing right here. So it adds a redirect URI as the intent login. This code challenge and code challenge method, this is something that is, it uses something called PKCE, PKCE, which is proof of key code exchange. And it's basically, when we, later on, what's going to happen is, if I go in here and I actually authenticate here, actually, let me switch back over here. We'll kind of follow this. So this goes to the auth here. The authorize on the AUth. that redirects you to Google. So you don't need to know what Google's authorized API is. This will tell you where you need to go. So when you go to Google, then it fetches all this stuff. All the stuff below here is stuff that Google does. So when you see these 404s, that's not our fault. Okay. So I'll go to Arborian here. And so now this has redirected me to a callback. This is 5005. So this is the AUTH API. And yeah, so the headers, I guess, is where we'll see. So the state here that it sends back, this is something that we generated, that Arborian generated, that the AUTH API generated, I should say. And it's actually token, assigned token. So if we look at this over here, these are the things that it's basically storing encoded in that. It's saying that this was a request from, I don't even know why we're storing the code challenge, but there's probably a good reason. Anyway, we're saying this is not really just coming back to us. We need to bounce this back to the UI. That's what this redirect URI is doing. This is intent to log in. The UI did not provide us a state itself, so we actually allow you to wrap another state around it. And then this code challenge has to do with the Pixie stuff, so it's automatically generating those. The AUTH does need to know what the provider ID is, and so we encode that as part of the state when it comes back. And then this is when was the token created and when does it expire. So we give it a relatively short expiration time. So that's what's actually encoded in that state. The code, this is sent by Google. And then these are some scope information. So what did Google actually send back to us? And so all of this comes back in the URL there. That gets bounced by the AUTH API to this callback right here. This is what actually gets sent back to the browser. So the only thing that we get is the state that we sent, which was no state, the intent, which was login, so that we can choose what to do, and the code, which is what we need to actually exchange for our token. We then take this data, post it back to the auth API, and we're going to give it the code. We also give it the code verifier, which we stored in some local storage, and that way we can verify that this is a legit, that we're legit and we are allowed to exchange this code for a token. So no, there's probably a little bit too much or a little bit extra information, stuff that you don't necessarily need to know about to use this, but that's the logic of the login. Any questions? I know it's a lot. Yeah.
I'm just trying to unpack it. So we're going to use this for multiple applications.
Yes.
Each one will kind of, I guess, like register them to NARF.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we register them through the AUTH. So that's what I'm calling this, the Arborian auth system.
Okay.
So maybe I could show some of the things that AUTH can do.
I have a
oh, go ahead.
How does the login screen, I had to step away for a second. How does the login screen look? And can we, is that just going to be a field that we put into the client's app? Or is it going to redirect like Cognito to?
Login screen's up to you as to what it needs to look like.
Okay, so it's just going to be a form on the page. It's not going to redirect to another site.
Right. So if you wanted to do a password login, then you could. So there's multiple different ways that you can authenticate here. Let me see if I've got. Yeah, I don't think I've got examples of all of them.
Yeah, I just didn't know if I was going to have to build like a login and forgot password and all that stuff.
So the forgot password, if there's gonna be passwords, which we don't have to have passwords,
Right.
then you would need to build something for that, because I didn't want the auth to take over the email communication flow. So password reset is pretty simple. The basic idea is you take the current password, which could be, you could randomize it if you want. Just assign a random password. Take the current current password hash, and you encrypt a JOT with it, and then send that as the login token. And then when you get someone trying to do a password reset, you decrypt the JOT and verify it against the current password hash. And if it matches, then you let them set their password. And if it doesn't, then you say, this code doesn't work anymore, try again. So I think that's stuff that you can do without knowing anything about the other authentication providers. And so that was why I decided not to do it as part of AUTH. Yeah. So let's see, some of the things that you can do here. We can create new providers. This could be kind of fun. So actually, first of all, let me get some client credentials. So I'm going to go here and set some authorization here. So let's get a new access token. And let's use client credentials to do that. And I'm going to come back over here, unzoom this, zoom this, and pull this off here. So I need the client secret. Let's actually do this. Client secret's already configured. That should be fine. Actually, do we already have some client available tokens? Oh, I don't have any available. Yeah. This is going to fail because I didn't set the variable. So let's try this again. Oh, that's so sad. Not sure what I'm doing wrong here. Oh, did I just not configure it right? Yeah, I should probably give this link here. Oh, I should actually do this as a base. Boom. Okay, so we got client credentials right now. So this is one of the ways that you can authenticate with OAuth. And what this is saying is, I am the person who owns this app, and this is the client secret. So this is like the granddaddy of all of the authentications. You can do anything with this. So I just did that, and now I can come in and say, show me all the providers. That's not that interesting. How about show me all the identities? Oh, that's so sad. It should have worked. Well, the idea behind getting all of the, maybe I should talk a little bit about the different things that we'll deal with here. No, let's just try this. We come over here and just create a new drawing here. So a few things that we have here. We have the app is at the top. And an app, actually, I don't know why they don't center those by default. Wish that they would. Apps have users. right? That's one of the things that we want to maintain. And I call users subs because sub is the terminology that is used inside of, well, inside OAuth tokens sometimes. So we've got subs and roles. And so here I should connect these. There you go. I'll just connect them like this. And so one app, these are awful. This is why I want to whiteboard. This is why I want COVID to be over. Has N roles. There's one magic role called Dunder admin, which has the Dunder admin permission, which can do anything, theoretically, which apparently wasn't working just now. Apps can also have, in subs, and this shouldn't be too surprising. And then we can have one sub can have N roles.
Is an app referring to?
I should say this is
like
N.
One of our clients, or is it?
Yeah, it's one of our. So it would be like the TCPA app. It would be the AUth app, because the AUth app can be administered using AUth as well. So it's got its own, like you can use the credentials. It's protected by itself, basically. So that's kind of the core authentication. Now we also have providers and identities. So I should put, I should make that bigger. Okay, provider. And because of fonts, identity is just as small. Okay. So I guess everything, like everything's under an app. So that's almost not that important. But an identity, this is where things get a little bit interesting, because identities are actually end-to-end. So an identity means it's a user on, or it's some particular set of user credentials on some particular authentication provider. So think of this, and this would be something like Google. Or PCC, right? And so an identity would be Rick at Arborian. .com or Rick446 at Arborian.com on Google, or TCPA admin user on PCC or something like that. That's what the identity means. An identity could hook up to, I should say 0 to N subs. So the normal case is going to be one identity is going to hook up to one sub, and see, a sub can have, sub can have any number of identities. So this is if you've got one set of credentials that you always use to log into the website. But there's no requirement that that be the case. We actually have or had a client where that was not the case, and that is MapHabit. So MapHabit needed people to be able to use their point-click-care login credentials to log in as one of any number of users on their website, right? So they would share a point-click-care login, and then like 7 different users would be there. And so they had to have a user selection screen after that. And so this supports that particular use case. The providers themselves, this is just one-to-one. So And yeah, I should move this up a bit. And then the apps are also going to be 1 to n here. Does that make sense? The way things are going there? So
an app
yeah.
can have many providers, and each provider will have one identity.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So each provider can have many identities.
Yeah, it meant like, and a provider is just the link between an app and an identity. So there's a little bit of configuration.
Identity would be my Google account, and then the provider would be the Google authentication thing happening.
Yeah,
and
so
that lets me log into the app.
Yeah, so Google's client ID is, a client ID that Google gave us is configured as part of this provider. There's also a field which is the plugin ID, which says that this is a Google type provider. So theoretically, we could have multiple Google apps configured for a single app, but that doesn't make any sense most of the time. You might, on the other hand, have like multiple, I'm trying to think of a good case where you would do this. So maybe there's not a good case. I was really going back and forth as to whether to allow you to have more than one provider per plugin type. But yeah, that's the basic data model. And then there's 4 kinds of tokens. You have provider tokens. Let me just put these here. These are also connected to, well, actually, let's just do this. Oh. There's provider tokens for access, and there's provider tokens that are refresh tokens. And then there's AUTH tokens as well for both access. So most of the time, you're never going to use these. But there is actually an API that says, please give me an access token for this given identity. So that would be, I need to do something on behalf of a user. Maybe I'm going to use the Google Drive API. And so I need their access token. And then so you can do that. And you can also issue or grab a provider token for client credentials. So that's something that we do with point-click care. Most of the time when we need to do any data APIs with point-click care, we're going to be using kind of the super user admin credentials to do that. They call it a 2-legged auth token. And so we'll be using that particular flow there. We never provide refresh tokens for client credentials. We never use those. There's no need to, because if you can get if you can issue a provider token, you don't need the refresh token anymore. But you've got the client ID and you've got the client secret. So that's enough of a secret. That's your quote unquote refresh token in that case. All right, so, and deciding to do this was really iffy. Wasn't sure if that was a good decision. So let me see if I can add another one. Yeah, let's go to the console in AWS and see if I can also add in my TCPA login here. Oh no, okay. Yeah, something happened with my LastPass and it doesn't like to fill that one in.
You can manually set the field names in there. I had to do that for AWS.
What did I do wrong? Oh, I know. Got the wrong one there. Okay. I mean, some of my AWS accounts work and some of them don't. So, so jump over to Cognito. Look at our user pools here. So app client settings. Wait, no, app integration. Actually, where were the? I forget where the secrets are. So Cognito, what? Oh, did I say AWS Cognito? Of course I did. I didn't intend to allow sign up, but, oh, I didn't allow sign up, good. Okay, do you remember where the secret is here?
I don't.
Okay. This is the tricky. Part of all this, because I mean, it should be right there, I think. Oh, app clients. Sorry, this is it. Because why make things simple, right? Okay, so that's the client ID. Client secret will be here. And it needs a little bit more. Let me see what that is. Needs the user pool ID. And it can derive everything else out of that. And unfortunately, I don't have anything that will tell you what every one of these require. Eventually, that would be a nice thing to be a fillable form. Oh, and I wasn't going to do this here. I was going to do this in the in Postman. What? Oh, sorry, that's the post the token. Yeah, there we go. Looks like I'd already had my Google stuff set there. So this is the API for doing something here. So let's say we're going to do AWS Cognito, and oh, we've already got the. Okay, well let's just grab it first. So I should have already created the provider. I should have done it all through here. So there's the Google one. We don't want to look at that one. Here's the AWS Cognito. So it didn't know some of the things that it needed to know. And so it just filled in kind of default attributes, but we can set that. So I'm going to go ahead and grab its ID. And this should actually be a post, or sorry, a patch. And, oh, looks like it's already set up to do that. Okay, let me save that and send it and see if it works. Doesn't like my token. Okay, let's try this. See if we can grab a token again. Oh, maybe I just needed to do that. Boom. Okay, so now there's a Cognito, and we just configured it. And so when we come back over here to NARF, refresh this, there's now an AWS Cognito. And this one does not allow login. So let's log out everything here. Log in. We'll try to log in here. User not found. Okay, so it doesn't work. So let's log in as Google. And now I'm going to go to the login page again, which I don't have a good way of doing that.
You said it doesn't allow login. You mean sign up?
Oh, sorry, sign up. Yeah.
Okay.
And I have not created a user that's linked to that identity yet. So
I see. So you're going to link them. Okay.
yeah, so if I click link here, and I haven't tested this since a couple of days ago, I get an error, which you'd expect that. So yeah, we can't see what error it actually gave us. If I come here, yeah, it just tells me there was an error. So let's try this again. Okay. And the network gave us a 400 because it doesn't have a grant type. And that's probably something I can fix pretty easily in the UI. In my callback, oh, it's not actually in the callback. This is, oh, sorry, I'm looking at the, actually, I think it might be in NARF. So in our request, we had the client ID, the code verifier, but we didn't have the grant type. So we got to have that. So the login is there. And so here we definitely need to have that there as well. I forget that this isn't going to reformat for me really nicely. So these are things that NARF should be handling for us. So hopefully you won't need to worry about it. You'll just be able to call code link with the code and it will link it. And this is, yeah, it's failing with a 403 now. So that means it's unauthorized. So we're gonna have to go back to the login and get another one. So let's try this one more time. With a good deal of luck. We're logged in as the same user now. So I can, so this, you see, this is Rick Copeland at Arborian.com. That's my email address and everything. So let's log out everything. Log in here, and now I can log in as AWS Cognito. And it knows my original sign-up information. Log out everything. Log in again. Log in as Google. And there's my original sign-up information. Does that make sense how that was kind of working? We have now two, kind of going back here, we have two different identities linked to the same sub. So I can either log in as Rick at Arborian, or I can log in as whatever that was on the Cognito website. Both of those allow me to log into the overall application. And then later on, if I need to use those tokens and get, say, an access token to Google or an access token to AWS, then I can request that as well through the API later on. So, and this would be the way that actually, let's, let me grab my access token here from NARF. And I'm going to come back over to Postman. And let's go over and, okay, go to my authorization here. Set the access token, not to A, but that, and update it. And let's see about the identities that I know about. So now I'm logged in as just a regular old user. Right, so it's got this particular identity has certain claims. These are things that that identity knows about us. That's how it was able to do that sign up. We also have an identity down here, and this is the TCPA one with the Cognito. These are the things that that one knows about us. So I'm just doing things now as a regular user using this API. So I can say, show me all of the roles that are available. So it tells me that there is an admin role available. I'm not part of it. I can't actually do anything with that yet. I can get a list of all the subs. That's just going to be me. These are mainly for admin type things. I can get my own sub, but I couldn't get anybody else's sub. I can get user info. That's how it knows things about me as well. So if I switch over and use client credentials now, I'm going to assign let's go back to the subs. And this is the sub ID. It's just a nice little random string. And I am going to give myself a role. So this should also be a patch. I changed that to make it more JSON API-y. That user info is fine, but the main thing here is I'm going to add a role. So let's save that, send it. Okay, so now my little user has the role of Dunder admin. So now as a user, I can now do all the things that you'd normally do to administer the site. Ultimately, hopefully, you're going to only need to know about a smaller number of things. If you needed to build an admin screen, there's going to be an API for dealing with subs, and people can sign up automatically with their Google, or you can add new users. There is a post sub. So if I needed to create a user right here, I could do that. I could post, let's see, do I have, oh, that's getting a provider token. So if I'm an admin, so let's look at all the identities. Let's say I want to have a token to Cognito. So actually, I want the identity ID, right, this one. Okay, so that's the identity ID that I want. And then the provider ID was this guy right here. Oh, come on. You're not gonna let me? Okay, well, I'm not sure about that, but it should allow you to basically say issue or refresh a token for this particular identity. So that is the goal, at least. And I'm on the client credentials. This was for a Cognito. Yeah, and that is the identity. Okay, not sure why that's not working. If I try to do this without any identity, I don't know if that will work actually. Yeah, it doesn't like that. Then it's going to try to do a client credentials, and it won't let me actually do a client credentials there. So I'll have to figure out why this authorization is not working for this one. But anyway, that's the basics. And I am going to unfortunately have to go right now. I forgot I had another call at 1, scoping call with Develop Intelligence. for another class. So anyway, that's where NARF is going. Hopefully it will be, yeah. Cool. I will see you.
All right. Thanks. See you.